I thought working nights at a gas station would be easy. No pressure, just quiet hours. But at Osterman Gas, the rules aren't suggestions. They're survival guides. I didn't take them seriously until the radio started repeating my voice back to me. They say Route 66 is a dying vein, a long stretch of asphalt where time crawls slower than the desert heat. Out here, under a sky wide enough to swallow your thoughts whole, things get quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not the kind that lulls you into rest, but the kind that creeps in with too much silence, like something is holding its breath. That's where Osterman Gas squats, right off a cracked bend of the road, buried between nothing towns and endless sand. A single flickering sign, for gas pumps, 3 working, and the buzzing neon open light that hums just loud enough to keep you from forgetting how alone you really are. I took the night shift thinking it'd be easy. No customers, no bosses breathing down my neck. Just me, a few packs of smokes, and the sound of the desert brushing against the glass. It paid more than it should have, considering it was barely a job. But then again, money always comes with strings, especially when it's quiet money. The station itself looks like it hasn't changed since the 70s. There's a metal rack of old car fresheners no one buys, a dusty soda cooler that shutters every 15 minutes, and a register that still uses physical keys to open the drawer. On my first night, I walked in and noticed a list taped above the counter in faded red ink. It was framed, oddly, as if it were sacred. The rules: night shift only. 1. Don't activate pump 3 after 12 a.m. 2. If a man in a black suit asks for diesel, lock the doors and hide under the desk. 3. Don't talk to the reflection in the freezer glass. 4. Don't take anything from the lost and found bin. 5. If you hear knocking from the restroom after 3:30 a.m., do not answer it. 6. The radio is not broken. Do not change the frequency. 7. Check the roof cameras every hour, but never rewind the footage. 8. Do not, under any circumstances, go behind pump 7 during a full moon. Beneath the list was a single line in bold Sharpie. The rules are meant to protect you. I laughed, out loud. The kind of laugh you give when you're trying to prove to yourself that something isn't getting under your skin. For the first few hours, I ignored the rules completely. Turned the radio dial when the static got too annoying. Looked into the freezer glass and made faces. Used pump 3 for an old man driving a truck that smelled like burnt oil. He didn't say a word, just nodded and paid an exact change. But the moment he drove off, something shifted. Not in the air, exactly in the sound. The station fell into a deeper kind of silence, like the world had taken a step back and was watching. That's when the power cut out. Just like that. The lights blinked once, then died. The hum vanished. Even the buzzing neon sign flickered off. And for a moment, the world outside the window looked like pure nothing. I pulled my phone from my pocket, but it was dead. No signal, no battery reading, just a black screen reflecting my own face back at me. Only, it wasn't moving quite right. I blinked. My reflection didn't. Then the radio kicked in. Static at first, loud and sharp like it was trying to pierce something open. I stumbled back from the counter as the sound swelled, vibrating through the thin linoleum floor and into my knees. The station was dark except for the red glow from the emergency backup sign near the door. The radio's static shifted suddenly, and I froze. A voice. My voice. He's not gone. He never left. He's still inside. It was distorted, backward, but undeniably mine. My pitch, my hesitation, the exact rhythm of how I speak when I'm scared. But I hadn't said those words. Not out loud. Not ever. The voice looped, skipping slightly between phrases like a broken record. He's not gone. He never left. He's still inside. He's not gone. He never left. He's still. I lunged for the volume knob and twisted it hard to the left. Nothing. The dial spun freely like it wasn't connected to anything at all. I yanked the plug from the wall, but the radio kept playing. I could hear my own breath over the speakers, each ragged gasp broadcast back at me in real time. Then slightly before, it was as if something was anticipating my reactions, echoing them, but just ahead of the moment I lived them. I ran outside. The desert was pitch black. No moon. No stars. Just the infinite stretch of road and sand and the distant silhouette of the mountains. But the silence had changed. It wasn't just empty. It was full of something I couldn't name. Like the darkness was listening now and waiting. I turned back to the station. The lights were still dead, but through the front window, I could see something moving. My own shape, pacing behind the counter. But I was standing outside. I didn't go back in. Not until the lights came back on exactly at 4 a.m., flickering into life as if nothing had happened. The radio was off. The freezer was humming. My phone buzzed once, full battery. I stepped inside cautiously. Everything was in its place, except the list of rules. It had fallen off the wall, and I was lying face down on the floor, the frame cracked. I picked it up with shaking hands, turned it over, and noticed something new scribbled at the bottom in rushed handwriting. You already broke one. Don't break another. I don't know who wrote it. It wasn't there before, and the ink was still wet. Since that night, I've followed every rule without question. I check the cameras, I don't speak to my reflection, and I keep my eyes far away from Pump 7. But the thing that gets me, really gets me, is the way the rules feel alive. They're not just guidelines. They respond to what happens. They evolve. And that voice on the radio, it hasn't come back yet. But sometimes, around 2:17 a.m., the static creeps back in low, pulsing like breath behind glass. I keep the radio off now, but the cord's been missing since that night. And I swear, I heard myself laughing from it last night. But I wasn't laughing. I haven't laughed since I took this job, because deep down I think I know the truth. The rules at Osterman Gas aren't weird little warnings or quirky old traditions. They're a manual for staying human. And if you forget that, even once, you might not be the one who walks out when your shift ends. Not really. I still remember the first night I broke another rule. I didn't mean to, but that's the thing about Osterman Gas. Intentions don't matter. It only cares that the rule was broken. And once you do, something starts watching, waiting. It doesn't come right away. No, it's patient. It lets you forget what you've done. It lets you feel safe, until it's ready to remind you. The incident started with a storm, rare for this stretch of Route 66, but not impossible. The wind howled across the desert like a banshee, kicking up sand and grit that plastered against the windows like tiny fists. By midnight, the station lights were flickering again, and the walls moaned with each gust. The pumps creaked as if something leaned against them, too heavy to be the wind alone. I sat behind the counter, watching the storm on the exterior cameras. At exactly 12:14 a.m., the motion sensor light on pump 3 flicked on. That pump, the one from the first rule, had been quiet since the old man's visit. I'd avoided it like a bad memory, making excuses to direct customers to the others. But tonight, there was no car, no customer, Nothing but swirling dust. Still, the light stayed on. A moment later, the door chime rang. A man entered, tall, too tall, thin in a way that looked almost stretched, like someone had grabbed both ends of him and pulled. He wore a denim jacket and dark pants, but it was his face that bothered me, not because of what it looked like, but because of what it didn't. He had no eyebrows, no lashes, no hair. His skin was pale, too clean, like wax, and when he blinked, he didn't use his eyelids. His eyes simply vanished for a moment, like a camera shutter. He didn't speak. I cleared my throat. Need anything? He pointed outside, toward pump 3. My stomach turned cold. I almost said no. I almost remembered the rule. But then thunder cracked above the building so loud it shook the windows, and the fluorescent lights blinked off and back on again, buzzing angrily. In that moment, I wanted it to be normal. Just a weird guy during a weird night. So I gave him a nod, stood up, and flipped the switch for pump 3. There was a low thunk, the pump activating, and then everything went wrong. The cameras went black. All of them. The lights stayed on, but the monitors behind the counter blinked in a static, one by one, until I was left staring at 8 black and white screens showing nothing but noise. I tried the buttons. Nothing responded. I picked up the station phone. Dead line. I turned to look outside. He was gone. Pump 3 sat alone, still running, the digital display blinking zeros. But the man? Nowhere. Not on the lot. Not on the road. Not behind the pumps. Then the freezer door clicked open. I hadn't touched it. The cooler near the back of the store let out a long, metallic groan, and the glass shimmered like it was underwater. I stepped out from behind the counter slowly, heart thudding against my ribs, the air suddenly heavy and still. Inside the freezer, my reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't copying me. I took a breath. It didn't. I moved my hand. It stayed still. Then, without warning, the reflection smiled. Not a normal smile, a deliberate, too wide grin that split up the cheeks like someone had carved it with a blade. Its eyes, my eyes, bled black tears down both sides of its face, staining the cheekbones, but it didn't blink. I stumbled back. The overhead lights buzzed louder. One of them popped, glass raining softly across the tile. And then the radio flared back to life. I hadn't touched it since the first night. Hadn't even dared to look at it. But now it hissed with static again, louder, angrier, like it was being forced open from inside. A voice, my voice, whispered from the speakers. But it wasn't repeating old phrases this time. It was whispering something new. You let him in. He's wearing you. He's already driving. My chest tightened. I turned slowly to look at the exterior monitor. One screen flickered back to life, struggling against the static. Through the snowy blur of interference, I saw my car. It was idling at the far end of the lot. Headlights on, engine running, and me, another me, was sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, eyes staring straight at the camera. He smiled. My smile, but not mine. I ran outside, screaming, sprinting toward the car like a man possessed. The wind tore my jacket, stinging my eyes with grit and dust, but I kept going. The car's engine purred calmly as I reached it, then abruptly died. Empty. No one inside. I tore open the door. Nothing. No keys. No smell. No warmth. Like it had been parked hours ago. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A new message from an unknown number. Just 5 words. You're not in there anymore. I dropped it. The radio in the station was still playing. Through the glass window, I could see the flickering glow of the dial, the needle trembling across the frequency. When I stepped back inside, everything was back to normal. Cameras online. Lights steady. No sound. The list of rules was back in its frame above the register. But this time, a new one had been added. 9. If someone else drives your car, don't follow them. They're not going where you think. I sat down behind the counter, trembling. The air was thick, like someone had just exhaled after holding their breath for a very long time. I listened for the freezer to click shut again. It didn't. I didn't dare look. Later, when the sun crept over the desert and the dust began to settle, I locked the door behind me and drove home in silence. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt watched. In the rearview mirror, the gas station got smaller and smaller until it vanished behind the horizon. But for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw someone standing on the roof. Someone shaped like me. There's something wrong with the land beneath Osterman gas. It's not just the station, it's the dirt itself. The sand. The endless horizon that never changes, no matter how far you drive. I used to think it was just the desert playing tricks on my mind. That isolation and long nights made things feel more sinister than they really were. But then I started digging. Not literally, though I considered that too, but into the past. Into records, files, articles. Whatever scraps of truth I could find between shifts. I became obsessed with it, not for curiosity's sake, but because I needed answers. I needed something to cling to, because every time I returned to the station, I felt more like a guest and less like a person. The air didn't just feel off, it felt aware. It started with a logbook. I'd seen it before, an old leather-bound binder under the register with yellowed pages and entries going back decades. I assumed it was full of numbers, gas receipts, shift rotations. But one stormy night, while the power flickered and the wind clawed at the windows, I opened it out of desperation. Something had tapped against the freezer glass 3 times, and I wasn't going to look. I needed a distraction. Inside the logbook weren't receipts. They were warnings. Each entry, written in different handwriting, different pens, different voices, some shaky, some blunt, held short, clipped notes that read more like confessions than records. Do not accept cash from the woman in red. It's not money. Pump 2 is okay again. For now. Saw the man in the rearview mirror again. I don't have a rearview mirror. And then this. July 12th, 1983. Don't look behind pump 7 after a full moon. Just don't. No signature. No explanation. That date caught my attention. Because that was today's date, July 12th. And outside, the moon was full. My breath caught in my throat. A coincidence, maybe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the logbook had opened to that page on purpose. Like it had known what night it was. Like it had been waiting. I flipped further back. June 30th, 1974. The hatch isn't for maintenance. It's a lock. If it opens, we're all done. That line hit me hard. I'd seen the hatch before, behind the counter, half hidden beneath a peeling mat. A thick, rusted square of metal with no handle, no hinges, just a faded word painted in chipped white letters. Maintenance. I tried lifting it once. It didn't budge. But now, reading this, I wasn't sure if I wanted it to. The deeper I read, the stranger the entries became. There were drawings, crude sketches of symbols and faces with too many eyes. One page was soaked in something brown and sticky, dried into stiff patterns. Another was torn down the middle with only the words. It came in when I looked away. I slammed the book shut. My skin crawled, and for a second, I thought I could hear breathing beneath the floor. Shallow, measured, patient. I stepped away from the register and turned toward the door. Just as I reached for the lock, yes, I locked the door from the inside during every shift now. The bell above the frame jingled. But no one entered. The door hadn't moved. That was when I noticed something outside. There were footprints in the sand just beyond Pump 7. Fresh, deep, leading around the pump and vanishing behind it. But the security feed showed nothing. No movement. No person. Just a flickering image of the pump, skipping frames like it was trying to erase time itself. Despite everything, the rules, the warnings, the dreams I've been having about being buried alive in red dirt, I walked outside. I had to know. The night air pressed against me like wet cloth, and the sand crunched beneath my boots. I walked toward Pump 7 slowly, the wind whispering like distant voices speaking too softly to understand. Behind the pump was nothing. At first, just the back of the housing unit, a cracked concrete slab, and more sand. But then I saw it. Something buried. A square of metal. Another hatch. This one wasn't labeled. It was smaller, newer. Not rusted, but scorched, like someone had tried to burn it shut. As I stared at it, the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Dead. The world froze. And for a moment, it was so quiet I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Then a sound came, not from the hatch, but from the sky. A long, low humming. Not mechanical, not natural. It was like the sound you hear in your dreams, right before you wake up screaming. I stumbled back, and the humming cut off. The wind returned. The air felt normal again. But that's when I saw it, behind the counter, through the front glass window of the station me. Not just a reflection, not a glitch on the screen. I was standing behind the counter, staring back out at me. My hands on the register, my mouth moving, saying something I couldn't hear. I ran inside. The moment I stepped through the door, the lights buzzed and dimmed. The air turned sharp and metallic. I stood at the counter, staring at the empty space behind it. Nothing. No one. But the logbook was open again, and a new line had been added. Don't trust the mirrors. They lie when they're bored. I didn't write it. I hadn't touched the book. I called someone that night. Not a friend. I didn't have many of those left, but an archivist at a tiny historical society in Flagstaff. I fed him some excuse about doing a podcast on forgotten landmarks and asked if he'd ever heard of Osterman gas. There was a pause. Then he said, "Yeah, I've heard of it. Kind of. My granddad told me it wasn't real." I blinked. Wasn't real. Yeah. He said it was a story they told in the 60s. Ghost station on 66. Sometimes you'd see it when you were low on gas. Then it'd be gone the next morning. That kind of thing. People said it didn't show up on maps. I pulled out my phone. Checked Google Maps. He was right. There was no listing. No pin. Just a stretch of empty road. But I was in the building, standing inside it. He added one more thing before hanging up. My granddad said if you ever find it, don't go in. And if you've already gone in, never look at your shadow past 3 a.m. The line disconnected. I haven't slept since. I don't know what this place is. A trap? A seal? A mirror that shows the wrong parts of yourself? But it's not just a gas station. I think it was built to hold something in. And I think someone, or something, is trying to let it out. Or worse. Trade places. The desert doesn't sleep. Even when the wind dies and the sky is blacker than pitch, the silence never means peace. It means something is listening, waiting. I learned that during my 3rd week at Osterman Gas, when things finally stopped pretending they were subtle, when the whispers became voices, and the shadows started to walk. It started just after 2 a.m. The air was thick with electricity, even though the sky was clear. The stars above Route 66 looked pinpricked and wrong, as if someone had rearranged them into a message I couldn't read. I was behind the counter, watching the monitors with the kind of dead-eyed concentration you get when fear becomes your baseline emotion. I'd memorized the camera rhythms by now. Which ones glitched? Which ones looped? Which one showed too much? But that night, something changed. Camera 5, facing the east pumps, flickered once, then stabilized. That wasn't strange, but what it showed made my blood chill. My car was parked in its usual spot beside the building. I hadn't driven it since the last incident. I was certain of it, but the car on the feed was different. The license plate was wrong, just a few letters off, barely noticeable. The paint was faded in places that mine wasn't. The rearview mirror was missing, just like the entry in the logbook said. The headlights were on, but the engine didn't idle. There was no hum, no sound, and inside, in the driver's seat, sat me. Not just someone who looked like me, not a blurry shadow or vague shape. It was me. Same jacket, same facial scar I got from a broken shelf when I was 12. But he was staring directly into the camera. Not at the station, not at the road, just the camera itself. Then he smiled and waved. I recoiled like I'd been slapped. When I glanced away and back, the camera showed nothing. The lot was empty again. My car sat untouched under the dusty awning, quiet and dead. But the monitors still felt warm, like it had just finished broadcasting something that shouldn't exist. That was the first sign. The second came when the footsteps started. Above me. They weren't muffled or subtle. These were deliberate, heavy, dragging steps across the roof of the station. Steps that crunched grit and gravel with every move. I stood frozen for a moment, eyes glued to the ceiling, waiting for the footsteps to stop. They didn't. They kept circling, pacing in slow loops, like whatever was up there was trying to remember how walking worked. I pulled up the roof camera feed. There was nothing. No one. Just the dark, rippling roof with occasional gusts of sand skipping across the surface. But the audio feed hissed, static that rose and fell in rhythm with the steps above, as if the mic could hear what the camera refused to show. I tried to ignore it. Bad idea, because then the restroom mirror went dark. I didn't notice it at first. The door to the restroom had been cracked open slightly, typical on windy nights. But when I glanced past it during my next paranoid walkthrough, I noticed the mirror was wrong. It wasn't reflecting the sink or the lights or the cracked soap dispenser anymore. It was showing the freezer aisle. I froze mid-step. From the doorway, I could clearly see that the mirror in the bathroom was now displaying an entirely different part of the store, and not just reflecting it, but showing it at a slightly different time, because my reflection in the mirror wasn't moving with me. It was standing by the freezer, hand on the handle, staring back at me. It raised a finger, pressed it to its lips. Chill. Then the freezer door opened. On the screen, not in real life. I backed away, slowly, carefully. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't, because I'd finally understood the rules weren't just warnings. They were triggers. Some force, whatever owned this place, was reactive, curious, and it seemed to punish panic. So I walked back behind the counter and sat down. I breathed evenly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Not even when the hatch under the mat let out a low, groaning thump. I looked down. The mat had shifted ever so slightly. The hatch had moved. Not much. Maybe an inch. But it had never moved before. I pulled the mat fully off and stared at the rusted metal door. now with a faint seam of darkness around the edge, as if something underneath had pressed upward, just once, and then settled. The logbook was open again. I hadn't touched it. The page had changed. A new entry, dated today. It doesn't like the cameras. It prefers mirrors. And once it knows your shape, it can wear you from the inside out. I slammed it shut. My breath was short and ragged, my heart pounding hard enough to shake my vision. Then the doorbell chimed. But the door didn't open. The sound came again. The soft electronic chime that signaled someone entering. Twice. 3 times. Still, the door remained shut. I turned back to the monitors. The front door camera flickered to life. Someone was standing outside. At first glance, it looked like a woman. Thin, pale, wearing something like a nightgown or a torn summer dress. She stood with her back to the door, motionless, head tilted slightly to one side. No movement, no indication she was real. Then the feed glitched. One frame, normal. Next frame, her face against the glass. Pressed up against it, her eyes wide and unblinking, mouth stretched open in a permanent scream that didn't reach her eyes. No sound came through, but her fingers tapped against the door frame in a slow, deliberate rhythm, like knocking from the wrong side. Then, just as suddenly, she was gone. I checked the glass. Nothing there. But the knock came again, this time from behind me. I spun. The bathroom door was wide open. There was a shape in the mirror. Bent. Wrong. Crawling slowly out of frame. Its limbs too long, too loose. And its face. A blur. A smear of motion, like someone had dragged a brush across wet paint. I hit the emergency lights. The store flooded in a dull, red glow. The radio hissed to life. Static again, but beneath it, something layered. Words. Breaths. Then a voice. He's inside the hatch. He's not dead. Just dreaming. And near the next pillow. I tried to shut it off. The volume knob spun without resistance. The hatch beneath my feet groaned again. Louder this time. More urgent. I backed away. The mat was rising. Only slightly, but enough. I ran. Out of the building. Into the desert wind. I didn't stop until the glow of Osterman gas was a faint red smudge behind me, flickering like a dying firefly. I dropped to my knees in the sand, panting, trembling. But then, the humming began again. From the earth. From the direction of Pump 7. I looked back. The camera feeds had been wrong. There was something behind Pump 7. Something buried. Something with seams and bolts and scorched edges. A second hatch, yes. But that wasn't the end of it. Because now, even from this distance, I could see it was opening. A thin crack. A breath of dark. A glimpse of something below the world that shouldn't be awake. Then the radio crackled again, this time from inside my coat pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was on, full battery, and on the screen, a single word blinked in red. Run. The hatch was opening, and for the first time since I started working at Osterman Gas, I understood something bone deep and terrible. The rules weren't warnings, they were locks. Not on doors or behavior, but on reality itself. They kept the seams of this world stitched tight, and one by one, I had loosened them. I didn't sleep that day. I sat on my apartment floor with every light on, wrapped in a blanket, phone turned off, staring at nothing. I was afraid to look into mirrors, afraid to blink too long. I felt stretched thin, like I was coming apart molecule by molecule. And when my shift rolled around that night, I considered not going back. I considered disappearing. But something deep inside, something older than instinct, pulled me to the car, started the engine, and drove me back to the edge of Route 66. Because some jobs, once taken, don't let you quit. As I pulled into the gravel lot, Osterman gas buzzed with a dull red glow, like it was breathing, like the building itself knew what was coming. The sign above the store flickered. The letters warped briefly into something unfamiliar, symbols I can't describe, but then snapped back to Osterman gas. I unlocked the door with trembling hands. The moment I stepped inside, the radio turned on by itself. This time, it wasn't static. It was music, a warped version of a lullaby I couldn't name, playing backward through layers of hissing white noise. The logbook was open again. Another new line scrawled across the page in thick, wet ink. One more broken rule, and the dreamer wakes. The dreamer. That word had appeared before, in the whispers, in the freezer glass, in the corners of the monitors when they glitched. I didn't know what it meant, not really, but I'd seen its shape, and I think I'd spoken to it once, or it had spoken through me. I looked around the store. Nothing out of place, but the silence pressed against me, not empty, but full, like 1,000 eyes just outside the walls. And then, 3:33 a.m., the knocking started, not at the door, not on the roof, from beneath the hatch. 3 knocks, slow, measured, like someone trying to remember how to knock after too long in the dark. I stared at it. The rusted square of metal was pulsing, like something breathing underneath. A heartbeat through steel. Then, the voice on the radio changed. No longer whispers. Clear, calm, familiar. My voice. I see you. I'm almost there. You can rest now. It wasn't me speaking, but it used my cadence, my rhythm, my soul. The security cameras blinked. All feeds returned. But something was different. The station was full of people, dozens of them, standing stock still in different aisles. By the soda cooler, at the coffee machine, lined up along the bathroom hallway. But when I looked around the store with my own eyes, no one was there. Only the monitors showed them, and all of them were staring at the counter, at me. I tried to turn the screen off. I couldn't. I flipped the breaker. The light stayed on, and the hatch lifted an inch. No wind, no sound, just a hiss of air so foul it felt sticky on my skin. The smell of old fire, like burnt meat sealed in plastic and left in the sun. Then, the freezer door slammed open on its own. I ran for it, my body acting without permission. Something in me needed to see what was inside. And there I was, again, standing in the freezer, wearing my clothes, smiling, arms open. Behind him, rows of blackened eyes stared back from the frost. Pale figures curled into themselves, mouths sewn shut. One of them blinked, and blood poured from its nose in a perfect, upward stream. I fell backward, and the phone rang. It wasn't supposed to. It had never rung before. It wasn't even plugged in. I picked it up. A single voice whispered, "Read the last rule." I turned to the wall behind the register. The list had changed again. The original 8 rules were still there. But now, at the bottom, beneath a line of deep gouges in the wood, a new one had been etched in jagged red. 10. If the hatch opens, and your reflection smiles, kill the lights. Don't let it see itself. My reflection. I turned. There it was, in the store window. But it wasn't copying me. It was smiling, slowly, stretching its mouth wider than humanly possible. And behind it, the hatch fully opened. The room turned cold, freezing. The lights flickered once. Then it crawled out, not with a scream or roar, with a breath. The sound of something waking up from a dream it didn't enjoy. It didn't have a body, At least not one I could describe. It was a shape, a mass, a weight that twisted light, something that made reality ripple just by existing. It rose from the hatch like smoke in reverse, crawling upward into the air, legs forming from shadow, face forming from memory. And then I understood it was trying to become me. That's why the station showed me false versions. Why it echoed my voice. Why it wore my smile. It wasn't mimicking. It was rehearsing. I lunged for the switch. The lights. The only weapon I had left. My hand hit the panel, and just before I flipped it, I saw my reflection reach the window. Eyes wide, mouth grinning. We locked eyes, and I killed the lights. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. Heavy, pure, final. The thing hissed, angry, denied. I heard the shatter of mirrors, the groan of walls, the snap of tendons that didn't exist. I screamed into the void, waiting for it to take me, to wrap itself around me and wear me like skin. But it didn't. It stopped. Silence again. And then, the emergency lights blinked on. The hatch was closed. The station was empty. The logbook lay open again. A single line, dated now. Good. You remembered. It's been 3 nights since then. Nothing else has happened. The station has been quiet. Almost too quiet. As if the thing beneath is nursing its wounds, waiting for the next mistake. But now I know. The rules are real. They're not protection from things out there. They're protection from what's under us. From the dreamer. Every night before my shift, I check the list. I count the rules. I tape a new copy by the bathroom, by the cooler, by the back door. And when I clock in, I say the same thing out loud to no one. I'm not a reflection. I'm the original. I am the one who breathes. Because if I ever forget that, even for a second, I might not be the one who clocks out at dawn.